Yo, what up, Perry? How you doing, my brother? Peace. Hope you're chilling and grilling tonight. Just thought I'd do a little drawing stream before I head off to practice. I hope this reconfiguration I did of my camera settings is cool. It seems to be working fine. Actually see some of the details here. So that's cool with me, you know. The lighting situation is a bit strange, but you know, it seems that if I blast it with light, it's not really the best option, or is it? Huh. Well, that looks okay. It seemed to me that when I hit it directly with the light, it was like pure white. Oh, stop it. There we go. I don't know if it's the light bulb or who knows, with the camera maybe. It's been doing some very odd stuff. There we go. Yeah, it should be fine. You know, it's cool seeing the full footage of the show you went to, man. It looks super duper dope. Hopefully one day I could go with you. Have a good old time. Let's go back to some Bob. This one I started earlier is a pretty good one if I remember. Even has a bit of his quote unquote stand up, you know, the Bush and Quayle thing, which is mostly meant as a joke type thing, but then he gets into the good stuff later on.
George doesn't want us to know whether he's telling the truth or lying, but he wants us to know he's not stoned while he's doing it. I lived in Ireland for 6 years, as some of you may have heard. Ireland is something else. There are no two clocks in Ireland that agree. This is true. I've been all over Ireland, and at Dublin, where I lived most of the time, there are about 1,000 clocks in Dublin, and you can't find two that ever agree. In Cork, which is the capital of Cork, the Irish go in for redundance a lot. The capital of Cork County is Cork City, where you can buy a cork leg if you lost your leg in one of the civil wars. In Cork, there's a courthouse, the City Hall courthouse building has a tower with 4 clocks on it facing the 4 quarters, and they always have different times on them. The Irish don't believe in linear time. And Porrick Pier Station in Dublin, which is where all the railroad trains come in or out. If you're going into Dublin or coming out of Dublin, you go through Porrick Pier Station. And there's 2 clocks in the waiting room, and they always disagree. I was there one day in 1985, and an Englishman said in a loud, angry voice, "How typically Irish, the clocks don't agree." And a Dublin man said, "Why, sure, if they agreed, one of them would be superfluous." That's good Irish logic for you. As James Joyce, I see they gave me, as a prop, they gave me poor Yorick. I knew him well, a fellow of infinite jest and merry fancy, and a copy of Finnegan's Wake. If I run out of ideas, I'll open Finnegan's Wake at random and see how that fits into the topic of the night. Joyce pointed out that there are only three world-class philosophers of Celtic genes, as distinguished from designer genes. There's Erigena, Scotus Erigena, whose name means the Irish Irishman. He lived in the Middle Ages when people got weird names like that in Latin. And then there was Bishop Berkeley, after whom this city is named, only we don't pronounce it Berkeley anymore, we pronounce it Berkeley. And then there was Henri Breton, who was Henri Bergson, who was a Breton Celt. And all three of them denied the reality of time. That's why none of the clocks in Dublin agree. The puka, who's a 6-foot-tall white rabbit who lives in County Kerry, he hangs around pubs. If you come out of a pub at night, the odds are the puka will jump off behind a tree, grab you, and drag you off into an alternative time. You'll spend thousands and thousands of years going through the whole ring cycle of Tolkien, followed by the ring cycle of Wagner, which is even more turgid, followed by chasing Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader all over the galaxy, followed by Paradise Lost and Don Giovanni, and the Finn McCool epic and the Cahulin epic, and all the Norse legends, and the Wizard of Oz. And after a couple of thousand years have passed, the puka gets tired of playing with you and lets you go. You're on the road, and it's only a few minutes after you left the pub. This is typical of the way the Irish fairy people are. They don't believe in linear time at all. Of course, in Dublin, where all the atheists live, they say the chance of meeting the puka is directly proportional to the number of pints of Guinness Stout you had that night. But I am not supposed to be talking about the Irish time sense or Finnegan's Wake or pukas tonight, although it is curious. There is a play about a puka that was written by an American. It got made into a movie. It has James Stewart in it. Yeah, there's a scene. I was looking at that movie back in 1973 at a period in my life when I keep walking towards this side of the stage because the light over there is so bright it almost blinds me, in case you wonder why I like this corner of the stage.
We need you in the light for this video.
I see. I got to go back and... I should have brought my shades with me and look more sinister. No, these are kind of LA type clothes, I suppose. If I had shades on too, everybody'd be sure I was here to peddle cocaine. You know, you can get exactly the same effect as cocaine by putting talcum powder up your nose, rubbing it in with sandpaper, and then running around the house burning all the money you can find. Cocaine is just nature's way of telling you you've got too goddamn much money.
Want to borrow these?
A few years ago in Miami, Florida, the Dade County District Attorney indicted all the officers of a bank called the World Finance Corporation. He charged that they were knowingly, not accidentally, or while their backs were turned, or while they were in the John jacking off or anything like that, but knowingly and deliberately running the biggest cocaine money laundromat ever uncovered in legal history. The World Finance Corporation, the DA claimed, was not just a bank that occasionally laundered cocaine money. It was a bank set up deliberately to launder cocaine money, and everything else was side interest. He claimed all of the major cocaine suppliers in South America were using the World Finance Corporation to launder their money. The DA managed to convict 4 executives of the bank. He charged that the CIA interfered with his investigation and prevented him from fully exploring the background of 8 other officers of the bank. More water. All 8 of whom were former members of the CIA. What does former member of the CIA mean? There is the literalist interpretation, and in Berkeley you've all read Idries Shah, and you know you should never trust the literalist interpretation of anything. The literalist interpretation is a former CIA agent is somebody who's quit the agency and has no contact with them anymore. And then there's the esoteric interpretation, or the allegorical interpretation, which is that a former CIA agent is somebody who's been assigned to something so dirty the agency doesn't want it traced back to them. And so he's officially not on the books anymore, but he's being paid through a numbered bank account in Switzerland. Well, anyway, these 8 were former CIA agents. The president of the bank was named Hernandez Cataia, who was a CIA agent involved in the Bay of Pigs invasion. One of the most interesting parts of the Watergate tapes is when Nixon is discussing... these people want to make a tape, and I got to keep it on so they can make the tape. In the Watergate tapes, Nixon is talking about Howard Hunt's demand for $1 million. And even on that level, $1 million bribe is a lot of money. And Nixon says, I can get $1 million. I know how to do that. And then he says, we've got to pay Hunt. He might let that whole Bay of Pigs thing out of the bag. Now, what Bay of Pigs thing was Nixon talking about? By 1973, I thought we knew everything, all the scandals possible about the Bay of Pigs. But apparently we did not. In 1973, there was still something about the Bay of Pigs that we did not know, and Nixon was willing to pay $1 million to cover it up. And we still don't know it, because nothing new has come out about the Bay of Pigs since then that I'm particularly aware of. But Hernandez Cataia was involved in the Bay of Pigs invasion, and he was running this cocaine laundromat in Miami. Also involved in the Bay of Pigs invasion was Howard Hunt, who got $1 million for keeping his mouth shut about what he knew. Or he got part of $1 million. His wife got part of the money, allegedly $100,000. She was in a strange plane crash, remember? In which the pilot's blood was found to be full of cyanide. And the $100,000 had turned into $10,000 by the time the plane crashed. If you want more data on that, read The Yankee and Cowboy War by Carl Oglesby. Hunt has an interesting face, a very memorable face. He was on Jack Anderson's special on the JFK assassination a couple of weeks ago on TV. The most fascinating thing about Howard Hunt's face is that there were 3 tramps who were arrested on the grassy knoll in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. And one of the tramps looks astonishingly like Howard Hunt, which I'm sure everybody in Berkeley has heard about by now. On Jack Anderson's special, he had Howard Hunt on and asked him directly, are you that man in that picture? And Hunt says, absolutely not. I was in Washington that day. Well, that settles it. A CIA agent wouldn't lie about what he was doing on November 22nd, 1963. It is strange, though, that one of the other tramps looks like James Earl Ray, who later shot Martin Luther King. But the world is full of coincidences, or propinquities, or synchronicities, or whatever they are. Anyway, you might wonder what the World Finance Corporation... I think it's easier this way. I prefer the glare to not seeing what's happening around me at all. Dark glasses are great in the daytime, but at night you're practically blind with them. The World Finance Corporation, according to the evidence developed by the Dade County District Attorney and presented to the grand jury of Dade County, was sending all the cocaine money to the Cisalpine Bank in the Bahamas. The Cisalpine Bank in the Bahamas was jointly owned by Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, who was the manager of the Vatican Bank, and as a matter of fact still is the manager of the Vatican Bank. And the co-owner was Roberto Calvi, who was the president of Banco Ambrosiano.
Yo, what up, Chemo? How you doing, my brother?
Now, I don't want to make this too complicated.
Welcome, welcome.
We'll try to keep it simple. Marcinkus and Calvi, two simple names. Marcinkus, Vatican Bank, Calvi, the Banco Ambrosiano. Calvi was indicted for laundering heroin money for the Grey Wolves. The Grey Wolves are a fascinating example of domesticated primate psychology. We got a lot of equivalents of them in this country. They are Islamic fundamentalists. They believe that Allah is the real name of God. I know a lot of you here have heard the real name of God is Jehovah, but that was invented by a German scholar in the 19th century who didn't know how to read Hebrew. According to the Jews, the real name of God is Yahweh, but you shouldn't say it aloud because you might get struck by lightning. Nothing happened. But according to the Arabs, the real name is Allah. And the Grey Wolves are on intimate speaking terms with Allah, and Allah has a real hard-on against Israel. Allah believes that Israel should be wiped off the face of the earth. And the Grey Wolves are trying to carry out the will of Allah, which isn't easy because Israel is getting such heavy support from the United States and has the best military machine in the Near East and has lots of money. And so the Grey Wolves, to do the will of Allah, have to raise money of their own, one way or another, to carry on the battle against Israel. And so they engage in selling heroin. Well, why not? If it's the will of Allah, the end justifies the means, right? Of course, you can make a lot of money out of heroin, but occasionally you got to go in for sidelines if you need a lot of money quick. So the Grey Wolves also farm themselves out as assassins for anybody who wants to hire an assassin. Well, if it's the will of God, there can't be anything wrong with it. They also run guns for other terrorists. They've been connected with the PLO and the IRA and the whole alphabet soup of terrorist groups in Europe. One of the Grey Wolves tried to shoot the Pope a couple of years ago, Mehmet Ali Agca. But anyway, the Grey Wolves run heroin, and some of the heroin was going through Banco Ambrosiano, run by Calvi. Calvi was also accused of embezzling funds from his own bank and knowingly receiving for deposit counterfeit stocks. The counterfeit stocks came in several batches, but the biggest batch was $1 billion in counterfeit stocks printed by the Johnny Roselli mafia family in Las Vegas. How many of you have ever heard of Johnny Roselli before? Okay, so this isn't getting too complicated. Some of you can follow me. Johnny Roselli is in many places one of the leading suspects in the JFK assassination. Johnny Roselli was involved in the Bay of Pigs invasion. He was a prominent member of the American Mafia all of his life. He started out as a gunman for Al Capone in Chicago in the 1920s. And at the end of his career, he had risen to the level where he controlled the whole mafia organization throughout the state of Nevada. In 1961 and 62, he was working for the CIA, like many person in need of funds has found themselves working for the CIA. Johnny Roselli was hired by the CIA to arrange the assassination of Fidel Castro. Now, some of the things you read about the mafia in my books, among others, give you the impression they're infallible. No man can escape the mafia. Well, apparently, like a lot of other highly advertised organizations, they don't live up to their reputation because they tried 8 times to kill Fidel Castro, And unless the Cubans have some actor with a fake beard, they failed every time. Roselli told Jack Anderson that he was not involved in the Kennedy assassination when Anderson asked him directly, but Roselli said he knew which mafia family did do the job. Roselli was called to testify before the House Select Committee on Assassinations. He testified inconclusively. They then subpoenaed him to come back and testify again, and then he was shot. Oh, well, people get shot every day. According to Roselli's testimony to Anderson and to Congress, one of the main organizers of the Kennedy assassination was Sam Giancana in Chicago, the head of the mafia in Chicago. Sam Giancana had a particular grudge against Kennedy because he was largely responsible for Kennedy winning in 1960. 1960 was one of the closest races in American political history, and the reason Kennedy won instead of Nixon, the reason we didn't have Nixon 8 years earlier, which might have been good for us if we got it over sooner, we might have recovered sooner. The reason Kennedy won was that he carried Chicago, and Chicago gave him Illinois, and Illinois put him over the top. It was one of the closest elections in American history, as some of you may remember. The final results weren't announced until the day after election at around noon, as a matter of fact. Sam Giancana delivered Chicago to Kennedy. That was a deal that was worked out by Frank Sinatra. Isn't that amazing? Now, how many of you realize you owe Frank Sinatra the fact you had 1,000 days of John Kennedy? Yeah, Frank Sinatra said to Sam Giancana, this whole feud between you and the Kennedys, it can be ended. Let me make peace. And he arranged a meeting between John Kennedy and Sam Giancana, and Sam Giancana agreed to deliver Chicago, and Kennedy agreed to lay off on the mafia. Somewhere along the way, somebody changed his mind, and after Kennedy was elected, he unleashed Bobby as Attorney General and started giving even more problems to the mafia. So Sam Giancana was heard on several occasions to say that it would be better if they hadn't given Chicago to Kennedy, and it would be better still if Kennedy was removed from the White House as quickly as possible. That was also the opinion of Carlos Marcella, the mafia chieftain of Miami, who said that if we cut off the head, we don't have to worry about the tail, meaning the way to get rid of Bobby Kennedy was to get rid of John Kennedy. All of this is covered in a number of books and on Jack Anderson's TV special, which is coming up on TV every couple of weeks. One or another station picks it up and re-shows it. If you haven't seen it yet, try to catch it the next time. Anyway, Johnny Roselli, who's so interestingly involved in the Bay of Pigs and in the mafia's attempts to assassinate John F. Kennedy, which may or may not have been the prime factor in Dealey Plaza that day, Johnny Roselli printed up $1 billion worth of counterfeit stocks, which went to the Vatican Bank. Archbishop Marcinkus signed for the $1 billion in counterfeit stocks. There are many sincere Catholics in the world who cannot believe that the manager of the Vatican Bank and an archbishop of the church could engage in such activities. It is possible that Marcinkus did not know he was ordering counterfeit stocks. Maybe he thought he was ordering baby booties. When he received $1 billion in counterfeit stocks, I don't know why he didn't write back and say, hey, I wanted baby booties. Maybe he was absent-minded. He accepted the $1 billion in counterfeit stock, and most of it got shipped over to the Banco Ambrosiano, which was run by Roberto Calvi. Roberto Calvi was the man who owned the Cisalpine Bank in the Bahamas, together with Archbishop Marcinkus. It was the Cisalpine Bank in the Bahamas through which all the cocaine money came from the World Finance Corporation in Miami. The system by which the Banco Ambrosiano laundered heroin money for the Grey Wolves and the Cisalpine Bank in the Bahamas laundered cocaine money from South America, and it all ran through the Vatican Bank under the supervision of Archbishop Marcinkus. This whole system was organized by a man named Licio Gelli. How many people here have heard of Licio Gelli? One of the most influential men of the 20th century, and it looks like hardly anybody in the audience ever heard of him. Licio Gelli started his colorful career in the Second World War. He was one of the few individuals who can conclusively be proven to have worked for the Gestapo and the Communist Underground simultaneously. He had the Communist Underground in Italy convinced that he was spying on the Gestapo for them and helping them in their underground activities, and he had the Gestapo convinced he was spying on the underground for them. And he carried it off so successfully that he didn't get shot by either side and was not put on trial as a war criminal afterwards. With a record like that, it was only natural that he would believe he had very good luck and that the world consisted mostly of idiots who he could manipulate easily. So in the 1950s, he went to work for the CIA. His first job for the CIA was to move the Italian labor movement in a right-wing direction. The CIA felt the Italian labor unions were getting too left-wing. So Licio Gelli hired Sofia Loren to make short television bits of propaganda for the right-wing unions and against the left-wing unions. He also bribed all the left-wing union leaders who would take bribes so that they would take a more right-wing position. And with left-wing union leaders who would not take bribes, he arranged for the mafia to kill them. And so Italy took a sharp turn to the right at that point, as students of modern history may remember. So the CIA was very pleased with Licio Gelli, and they put him in charge of a lot of other projects. For a while, he was working directly out of the American Embassy in Rome. It was around that point that he went to work for the KGB. Well, if you can work for the Gestapo and the Communist Underground at the same time, you obviously are capable of working for the CIA and the KGB at the same time. Gelli shortly thereafter joined the Grand Orient Lodge of Egyptian Freemasonry, which was founded by the Duc d'Orléans and Count Cagliostro in the 18th century. And it is not recognized as a true Masonic lodge by any American Freemasons that I've ever encountered. Nonetheless, it's the strongest Freemasonic lodge in Europe. American Freemasons don't want to admit that. They say, oh, it's only a few nuts in France. The Grand Orient Lodge is all over Europe, not just in France. 1782 or 3. I don't know exactly. 82, 83, somewhere in there. The Grand Orient Lodge played a significant role in the French Revolution and in the Paris Commune of the 1870s, and where all Scotch Rite lodges have the Bible on the worshipful master's table in the center of the lodge, the Grand Orient has a book of blank pages.
Pretty interesting stuff, huh? Even if, don't have to believe it outright, but if one were to start snooping, it's a very good place to start, especially considering, hardly any of these power struggles or smaller conspiracies are ever talked about. It's tend to be talked about in the larger image, and it's very easy to hide certain people or certain events that way. And when you get into the nitty-gritty, I guess you do find out that not everything is so under control, not as much as they would like us to think.
You can interpret the symbolism for yourself. Within the Grand Orient Lodge of Egyptian Freemasonry in Italy, Licio Gelli formed a separate group called P2, which means Propaganda 2, which was named after Propaganda Uno, a socialist
Propaganda
group
2.
of the 19th century.
Escape to Africa.
Propaganda 2 had very little in common with Propaganda Uno. P2, to keep it simple, and I won't bother with the Italian names anymore, P2 eventually recruited 900 members of the Italian government. Some of them joined willingly because P2 had a lot to offer them, because it was gradually taking over the whole Italian government, and a large part of the Italian press and banking business too. Some did not join willingly, but one of the rules in P2 was that you had to write out a full confession of all your crimes to your immediate superior, who would then give you forgiveness for them. And by this method, Licio Gelli developed extensive dossiers on everybody in Italy in any position of power.
Wow.
You know, I quoted earlier from the Watergate tapes about Hunt and knowing the whole Bay of Pigs thing. Another poignant line in the Watergate tapes is when Nixon talks about Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover, and he said, Hoover would have fought. He would have scared hell out of people. He has a file on everybody. The nostalgia in that. You have this feeling Nixon thinks, here I am, I'm president, and I don't have a file on everybody yet, but that son of a bitch Hoover does. When Tom Murphy was made Attorney General by Roosevelt, he told all of his friends, the first thing I do when I get to Washington is I'm going to fire J. Edgar Hoover.
What year was that?
1940. You taking notes? A year later, some of Murphy's friends caught him at a party and said, whatever happened to firing Hoover? And he said, nobody can fire J. Edgar Hoover. That son of a bitch has something on everybody in Washington. Well, Hoover lived out his whole long life. Nobody ever did fire him. He died in office. Nobody could fire him. He did have a file on everybody. Well, Licio Gelli set out to get a file on everybody in Italy. And by the time he was through, he had over 950 members of the Italian government in the P2 group. This included the chief of the secret police. So when the Italian government indicted Licio Gelli for plotting a fascist, for managing a conspiracy with the intent of committing a coup d'etat and installing a fascist government in Italy, by the time the police got to Gelli's house, he had left for Uruguay, because the chief of the secret police was a member of the conspiracy and tipped him off. The chief of the secret police was indicted for conspiring with Gelli in several bombings which were blamed on left-wing terrorists when they were first committed, and in planning a fascist coup, and in the whole general conspiracy of laundering cocaine and heroin money. He died while awaiting trial. Gelli escaped to Uruguay. He came back a year later to Switzerland to get some money out of a numbered bank account and was put under arrest by the Swiss police since he was wanted in Italy, as I say, for financial frauds, stock and currency frauds, drug offenses, and plotting to overthrow the government. So the Swiss held him for the Italians to come pick him up. They held him exactly 3 days. The Swiss are alleged to have the most incorruptible police in Europe. Or they used to be alleged to have that until they tried to hold Gelli. They put him in their maximum security prison, and within 3 days he disappeared and was back in Uruguay. The Swiss are still investigating how that happened. The prison is in Geneva. I was there last year. A lot of tourists are now coming to see the prison. This case is much better known in Europe than in the States. There's been endless newspaper articles about P2 and the Vatican Bank. It's got less publicity over here for some reason. And I suggested, since the tourists are coming anyway, the prison might as well turn itself into a real tourist attraction. I said they should have over the gate of the prison the 3 monkeys: see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, and in nice Gothic German script, ficken Sie nicht mit P2. Don't fuck around with P2. They've got lodges all over Latin America, Central America, and in the United States and Canada. Licio Gelli was a guest at Ronald Reagan's first inauguration. There's a photo of Gelli and Reagan at the inauguration in a private conference, and they're both laughing. I often wonder who they're laughing at. Anyway, Gelli set up the system through which the cocaine and heroin was being laundered through the Banco Ambrosiano of Calvi and the Cisalpine Bank of Calvi and Marcinkus and the Franklin National Bank run by Michele Sindona, who was another member of P2, who had started out as a lawyer for the mafia and founded several banks of his own in Italy, and then came to the United States and started the Franklin National Bank, which eventually acquired a large interest in Paramount Pictures. And Sindona sold part of his interest in Paramount to the Vatican. So every time you go to see a Paramount movie, you're supporting the Pope. He also sold part of it to the Mafia, which is the most interesting sociological strange loop I know. The Godfather is a Paramount movie. Every time The Godfather is shown on television, the Mafia makes profits off it.
Oh my God.
Thanks to the ingenious Mr. Sindona. Michele Sindona was eventually indicted in New York for stock and currency fraud and embezzling $55 million from his own bank, the Franklin National Bank, and he disappeared. According to Nino Lobello, the Vatican correspondent for the Herald Tribune, he flew back to Rome and conferred with Archbishop Marcinkus. Wherever he was, he finally did return to New York and announced that he'd been kidnapped by the KGB, but had managed to escape. The jury did not believe him. He was convicted of 65 counts of stock and currency fraud and faking his own kidnapping to avoid standing trial. He then put up an extensive, heavily financed legal battle of 3 years to avoid being extradited back to Italy. He was eventually extradited back to Italy, where he was convicted of murdering a bank examiner. And then he was awaiting trial on the charges that he and Licio Gelli and Roberto Calvi and several others had been conspiring to overthrow the government and institute a fascist government, as well as various drug offenses. While he was waiting trial on those charges, Michele Sindona was poisoned in his cell. There were two different accounts that appeared in American newspapers within about 8 hours of each other. According to one account, Sindona got his evening meal and suddenly let out a laugh and said, "I will not spend my life in prison. I have just taken poison." According to another account, he just had his evening meal when he let out a scream and yelled, "The bastards have poisoned me!" It seems to depend on which jail guard you want to believe. Anyway, he didn't stand trial for trying to overthrow the government. A fellow named Nino Piccarelli was putting out a newspaper called the Osservatore Politico, and he was very interested in Gelli and Sindona and Calvi and the weird things that were going on in the Italian banking community. He did quite a dossier on them for one issue, and he sent a copy to the Pope at the time, Pope John Paul I. Pope John Paul I, who was succeeded, as you remember, by John Paul II, which I thought showed a lack of humor. If I was succeeding John Paul I, I would have called myself John Paul Ringo and get a real tradition going.
John Paul Ringo.
This crazy Polak who got in called himself John Paul II. Anyway, John Paul I read this stuff that Peccarelli sent him. He was so incensed, electrified, galvanized, and pissed off in general that he ordered Cardinal Vio to do an extensive investigation of the extent to which P2 was using the Vatican Bank for criminal purposes. The night that the Pope ordered that investigation, he was taken suddenly dead. There have been numerous claims that he was poisoned by the Council of Cardinals. These claims have not been substantiated in court. A good summary of all the evidence can be found in David Yallop's book, In God's Name. The Vatican has refused to release the death certificate, so we don't even know what the doctor said the Pope died of. We just know what the Vatican says the doctor said. They have not let any journalist see the death certificate, and they did not allow an autopsy. Nino Peccarelli, however, the guy who sent the Pope this inflammatory material about P2 and the Vatican Bank, We know what happened to Nino Pecorelli. He was shot dead on the streets of Rome. He was shot through the mouth. The mafia calls that sasso in bocca. That's the traditional mafia punishment for informers. Strangely enough, it happened to Sam Giancana, too. Do you remember Sam Giancana? Yeah. He was the guy who delivered Chicago to Kennedy and got pissed off because Kennedy did not lay off the mafia after that. Giancana was shot through the mouth, too. So was George D. Morgenschild, who was a close friend of Lee Harvey Oswald in Fort Worth and Dallas, who was suspected of being a CIA agent by a lot of conspiracy buffs around the country and private conspiracy investigators. When De Morgenschild was subpoenaed by the House Select Committee on Assassinations, he was found dead, shot through the mouth, too. That was ruled suicide. I guess it's a coincidence. This is more comfortable. The connection between the Vatican and the cocaine business has been fairly well established in what I've been saying so far. The mafia is bordered on one side by the Vatican and on the other side by the CIA. It is hard to tell at this point in history where the mafia leaves off and the Vatican begins on one side, or on the other side where the mafia leaves off and the CIA begins. It's easier to walk around without getting the glare directly all the time. The Knights of Malta. Now, let's hear it for the Knights of Malta. Yeah. Well, I'm glad to see we got some people with a sense of gallows humor in the house.
Any knights in the audience?
I will now tell you one of the secrets of Freemasonry. If I get out of here alive, the Masons are no more infallible than the Mafia. The Mafia couldn't kill Fidel Castro. We'll see if I can reveal Masonic secrets and escape. The 32nd degree of Freemasonry, which is the highest degree that you work your way through, the 33rd degree is honorary. The 32nd degree of Masonry deals with the death of Jacques de Molay of the Knights Templar in the Middle Ages. He was denounced to the Inquisition by the Knights of Malta. And the 32nd degree, the candidate is told that the Masonry exists for one purpose and one purpose only: to combat the Knights of Malta, who, according to this degree, are continually plotting, unceasingly, unselfishly, without any regard for their own lives or comfort, in a fanatically devoted religious way, just like the Grey Wolves believe Allah has divinely ordained them to wipe out the state of Israel. The Knights of Malta, according to the 32nd degree of Freemasonry, have taken the same kind of oath that God wants them to wipe out Protestantism and make the whole Western world entirely one Catholic hegemony with the Pope on top, like it used to be in the Middle Ages. And it is the function of Freemasonry to fight that forever. That's the 32nd degree. You don't find that out until you've gone through the first 31 degrees, generally.
Freemasonry against Protestantism,
unless they are willing to spend at least 4 or 5 days in a large library or go through all the initiations. I didn't go through all the initiations. I went around to old secondhand bookstores. The secrets of Masonry are not that hard to find out. The Knights of Malta still exist. They didn't go out of existence when Masonry was founded. The head of the Italian secret police, Mussolini, who was a member of P2, was also a Knight of Malta. Licio Gelli, whom I've been talking a great deal about, who put together the cocaine, heroin, Vatican Bank connection, and was taking money from the CIA and the KGB at the same time. He was a Knight of Malta. Michele Sindona of the Franklin Bank, convicted of 65 counts of fraud and of murdering a bank examiner. He was a Knight of Malta. Roberto Calvi of the Banco Ambrosiano and the Cisalpine Bank, he was a Knight of Malta. Ever hear of William Casey? He was a Knight of Malta. Ever hear of Alexander Haig? Another Knight of Malta.
Yo, what up, Che?
Ever hear of William
How you
Buckley
doing, dude?
Jr.? Another Knight of
Welcome,
Malta.
welcome.
Claire Booth Luce, a Dame of Malta.
She also was one of the people who
Some more Bob Wilson today.
something that most people
He's talking about extensive mafia connections of the CIA,
was through Life magazine that it was
extensive mafia history of the Catholic Church.
that work up at the
Now he's talking about
he was first presented.
Masons, Knights of Malta, and how they're
Booth Luce and Henry Luce
at war with the Protestants because they want to bring about a Catholic papacy, like in the olden days.
Henry and Claire
Which is surprising to me. I would think the Masons would be
went to prison.
Protestant-y, but
1970. About 90% of the people in the
I guess I don't know a whole lot about the Masons, really.
minds and wouldn't talk about
I guess all the imagery would be kind of, well, it is
say we agree with
fairly Christian, if I remember.
As he went to prison, they became as silent as moonlight on a gravestone. The Knights of Malta have their international headquarters in the Vatican. The Vatican Bank, of course, is inside the Vatican too. Nobody knows what goes on in the Vatican Bank except the managers of the Vatican Bank and God. Italian bank examiners cannot get in and look at the records because the Vatican is a sovereign state independent of Italy. The investigating magistrates who've been trying to make sense out of the P2 conspiracy since 1982 can't get in and look at the records of the Vatican Bank because it's not part of Italy. The Vatican Bank is the economic equivalent of a black hole in physics. Nothing gets out of a black hole once it goes in, and money that goes into the Vatican Bank disappears from the profane view of ordinary human beings. Only archbishops and God know what happens to it after that. There is a widespread suspicion among the Italian police and investigating magistrates that a lot of the money ended up in those Swiss bank accounts, one of which Licio Gelli was trying to get money out of when he was arrested. Licio Gelli was working for the communists and the Gestapo in World War II, for the KGB and the CIA in the 50s and 60s, and so it should be no surprise that he managed to be a Freemason and a Knight of Malta at the same time, even though those two are allegedly in a warfare for 700 years now. Licio Gelli went back from Uruguay to Switzerland recently and got arrested again. This time they managed to deliver him to Italy, and he was found innocent of the charge of blowing up the Bologna railway station. He's awaiting trial on other charges. Roberto Calvi fled from Italy when he was indicted and was found hanging from a bridge in London with bricks stuffed in his pockets. Bricks are symbols of Freemasonry. He was hanging where the rising tide had covered his dead body. The first degree oath in Freemasonry says, if I ever betray my fellows in the craft, may I be hanged where the rising tide will cover my dead body. So it's pretty obvious that Calvi was hanged by the Freemasons, or by people who devoutly wish us to think he was hanged by the Freemasons. His wife claims he was hanged by the Vatican because he was going to turn state's evidence against Archbishop Marcinkus, but she's only a hysterical widow.
Crazy.
And one of my principal sources on the cocaine and heroin links of various banks is Penny Lerno, a journalist for the National Catholic Reporter, who first got onto the trail of the cocaine and heroin laundering business in Miami and was shocked when it led her back to the Vatican. She went to her editor and said, I'm finding out more and more about the Vatican Bank. Can I print this? And he said, go ahead, keep digging and we'll print it all. And they did. And that's why the That's why the American Catholic Church, I more and more suspect, is going to split from the Vatican in the near future. I think it's going to be the biggest heresy since Martin Luther. Most American Catholic priests do not tell their parishioners that it's a sin to use birth control, which the Pope still says it is. And in many other ways, the American Catholic Church is moving away from the Vatican.
Yeah.
If I would try to sum up the general picture as I have put it together over the last 20 years or so, studying nutty conspiracy literature and serious journalism and trying to figure out how much truth there is in every source and comparing sources and so on, I would say that if you want to know what life in the United States is going to be like under George Bush and Dan Quayle, and since the CIA has now moved into the White House, so to speak, and since the CIA is almost indistinguishable from the mafia, a British journalist named Gordon Thomas, in a book called The Year of Armageddon, says the Pope has a meeting with the CIA chief in Rome once a week, and the Knights of Malta carry messages back and forth between the Vatican and CIA headquarters in Arlington regularly. So the CIA, the Knights of Malta, the Mafia, are more and more becoming one big happy family. So if you want a good view of what's ahead for this country, look at the Godfather saga, all 3 parts of it, all the way through twice, and then read the last 200 years of Sicilian history. Many people find it very hard to believe that the Mafia killed JFK. A lot of people still think the last official government word on the Kennedy assassination was delivered by the Warren Commission. Now that shows the tremendous effect the mass media have, because in actual historical fact, the last official word to come out of the American government was the verdict of the House Select Committee on Assassinations. And they concluded there was a conspiracy, and there were at least 2 gunmen, one on the grassy knoll. And the chief counsel for the committee, Professor Blakey, said in a press conference of his own, going a little bit further than the committee, the Mafia did it. All the evidence points that way. This is no surprise to anybody who studied Sicilian history or Italian history recently. Every 2 weeks or so, a politician gets blown out of his car, or an investigating magistrate gets shot down in the streets in Italy. The Mafia does not put up with crap from anybody. That's how they got to be the most feared organization in the Western world. Now, the CIA first started working with the Mafia before they were even called the CIA, back when they were called the OSS, and Lucky Luciano, the Mafia ruler of New York, was in prison temporarily. They made a deal with him. He made a deal with the Sicilian Mafia to help the American troops and not help Mussolini's troops during the invasion of Sicily. And America conquered Sicily very easily with the help of the Mafia. From then on, the symbiosis between the Mafia and the CIA has been growing steadily every year. The most interesting aspect of it all is that as this symbiosis or synergy has proceeded over the last 40 years, the spooks think they're using the Mafia. The Mafia thinks that it's using the CIA. And one of them is very badly deceived. Now, the CIA is full of pretty damn tough, mean sons of bitches, no doubt about that. But who are they? They're a bunch of Princeton and Yale graduates, basically. I don't think they are quite as mean, nasty, Machiavellian, and devious as the Mafia. So I think the Mafia is using the CIA, and the CIA just thinks they're using the Mafia. But who stands behind the Mafia? The Knights of Malta and the Vatican. And so, again, I say, Roberto Calvi, the banker who was found hanging from the bridge, the guy who ran the Cisalpine Bank with Archbishop Marcinkus, Roberto Calvi used to tell everybody Whenever the subject of literature came up, there's only one book you got to read. One book shows the world the way it really is. Read that book and you'll know how to get ahead in the banking business, any other business. You'll know how to become rich. You know what book that was? Not The Prince by Machiavelli, The Godfather by Mario Puzo. So I think it's time now that we have a break, and then I'll have a question and answer period. But just remember, if you want to know what the future is like, read The Godfather very carefully. Pasta Vazul.
So true. And there's some douchebag with a guitar here.
Could a master of fiction possess than the world's in a god-awful mess? And what better proof than the spook on the roof and the strange aloofness of you? Warm and the lavender and warm and under the raw wood.
Was of Norman ancestry. We there are... Somebody tell me when to stop. As we there are, where are we? We there from Tom Tit Tot to Tito Tom Totalitarian. T-T-2-O. Unday at Ubi. With his broad and hairy face to Ireland a disgrace. Whom will comes over, who do caps ever, and how else do we look our hike to find that pint of porter place? Am shot, says the big guard. Well, oh, I don't think I could find the same page again. Well, we got from Tom Tit Tot to Tito Totalitarian, which is from infancy to the totalitarian state. A little bit of Freudian symbolism in there. And why am I a look-alike a pot of porter piece, which is the question the prank queen asks when she comes to the castle of Howth in the first chapter. The prank queen was Grace O'Malley, who was the first woman pirate ever chartered by the English government. She was chartered to sink Spanish ships and allowed to loot them of any treasure they were carrying by Queen Elizabeth I. According to Lyndon LaRouche, Queen Elizabeth II sent Alan Watts and Aldous Huxley over to the United States to destroy us by spreading drugs in California, which is rather like sending somebody to Newcastle to teach them how to dig coal, I guess. Grace O'Malley came to Howth in 1600 and asked the Duke of the Earl of Howth, Christopher St. Lawrence, for Celtic hospitality, but he was of Norman ancestry and didn't grok Celtic notions of hospitality, so he slammed the door in her face. She came back and kidnapped his son. The Earl of Howth asked what ransom she wanted to release the son. That's the way they did things in those days. When somebody is held captive among the nobility, they would get a messenger asking, what's the ransom? And she answered the ransom was that the Earl of Howth should keep the door open at dinner time and feed any hungry person who comes. So the Earl of Howth agreed to do that, and they kept the door open at dinner time until the 1950s. That was over 350 years, at which point there were so many bums and good-for-nothings from Dublin coming up that they slammed the door again. I guess at that point they were sure that Grace O'Malley wouldn't come back. Since she died around 1610, or they took the liberty of burying her. In Finnegan's Wake, she kidnaps 3 children of the Duke instead of the Earl instead of 1, which is like a fairy tale structure. Everything in Finnegan's Wake comes in 3s, just like in fairy tales. And she has 3 questions. Why do I am a look-alike a pass of porter piece is the first question. Mark the wands, why do I am a look-alike a pass of porter piece? And the second question is, mark the twy, why do I am a look-alike a pass of porter piece? And the third question is Mark the Tris. Why do I am a look-alike a passive Porter piece? Though those are three pretty profound questions, worthy of sincere meditation. Why do I look as like as two peas in a pod, I suppose, is part of what she's asking, which implies that in some sense she's really two people, even though she only looks like one. She's also repeating the voice from the burning bush, I am. Moses asked, who am I talking to? And the voice from the burning bush said, I am who am. That's on the first page of Finnegan's Wake, nor a voice from a fire bellowed, Misha, Misha, to Tauf, Tauf, thou art Petrick. Misha, Misha is a pun on in Gaelic, that means I am, but it's a pun on the Hebrew, Moishe, Moishe, which is the first thing the burning bush said. That's the name of Moses in Hebrew.
Oh, shit.
So she's quoting Moses, and it seems the idea is that Moses and the burning bush are two sides of the same voice. So God and Moses are the same person talking to himself without realizing that it's the same person. God is trying to say, I am, and Moses thinks, well, I am too, but there's actually one I am. Why do I am a look at? It's the basic question of Buddhism. Why do we think of duality when there's really only one I in the whole universe? The I in the triangle. Of course, what this is on deep unconscious collective phylogenetic archives, the neurogenetic circuit, where all that stuff comes from. In terms of daylight reality, the dreamer in Finnegan's Wake is a publican, and he's just running over what he's been hearing all day. A pint of porter, please. A pint of porter, please. Porter is the cheapest kind of beer. And Ireland used to be a very poor country. As a matter of fact, it still is a very poor country, so people tend to order porter. And so far I haven't found any synchronistic link between that and anything I was talking about tonight, have I? Except for the totalitarian theme. I have been talking about totalitarianism. Joyce seems to have had the impression that totalitarianism is some kind of attempt to return to infancy. And Why Do I Am a Look-alike a Passaporta piece has a fairy tale, infantile sound about it too. I guess that's the end of my commentary on that for tonight. I could go further, but we don't need to go that deep into the Joycean psychoarchaeology. Finnegan's Wake is psychoarchaeology. It's going down through the various levels of the psyche to the most ancient ones where humanity hardly is differentiated from the animals. Like one of the recurring themes is Charlie, You're My Darling, which is the old Jacobite song, Charlie, You're My Darling. That was Bonnie Prince Charlie, who led the Jacobites in their attempt to recapture England from the usurping Dutch that the Parliament had appointed. The Jacobites being the Stuart family, who were the legitimate heirs to the throne. But of course, Joyce has misspelled darling to Darwin, so there's a reference to Charles Darwin in there, Charlie, You're My Darling. And Charlie, You're My Darling also refers to Charlie the chimp in Phoenix Park Zoo, where most of Finnegan's Wake is set. And Charlie the chimp and Charles Darwin remind us of our ancestry and that level of Finnegan's Wake, which is psycho-paleoanthropology. And I guess that's enough on that. I will now entertain questions, or the questions will entertain me. We'll see. Yes?
I was wondering about Michael Dukakis' possible connections also with the CIA and so on and so forth. And if he doesn't have them, how could he have lived 4 years in office, and what kind of impact could he have with the government?
Repeat the question.
The question is, what links does Michael Dukakis have with the CIA?
CIA and
Yes.
the Knights of Malta, the Vatican.
I don't have any information about that, but I would say that it takes $100 million to run a campaign for president. So we're not going to find anybody running for president who isn't part of the power elite or deeply in hock to the power elite.
Yep.
All through the campaign, people were complaining, why doesn't Dukakis bring up Why doesn't he make an issue out of Bush's links to the CIA and the death squads and the cocaine business and so on? And the only answer I can imagine to that question, well, there are two possible answers. A, Dukakis is an idiot. And since he taught law at Harvard for 7 years, I doubt very much that he's an idiot. And the only other answer is that he and Bush drew up some ground rules in advance, which were, Dukakis agreed he wouldn't talk about certain aspects of Bush's career, and Bush wouldn't talk about certain aspects of Dukakis' career. I can't imagine what that is that Bush didn't talk about, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if it links back to the CIA. Yes?
In light of that question, would you comment on the fact that George Bush was a member of the secret society Skull and Bones during his senior year at Yale?
Yeah, Skull and Bones is very mysterious. Their crest has 23 on it backwards. It says 32. Some claim that's because it was founded in 1832, but I think they did it to give me a backwards 23 and confuse me. William Buckley is a member of Skull and Bones, too, which makes for an interesting, strange loop, because Skull and Bones seems to have a lot of Masonic traditions, and yet Buckley is a member of the Knights of Malta. Timothy Leary made one of the most intelligent comments on Illuminatus I ever heard. He said, basically, what you show is that there are 24 conspiracies on whatever level you look. And Tim said, I discovered that when I was in Folsom. I realized that in Folsom there were 24 different gangs fighting over the turf. Who was going to control the prison yard?
Exactly.
And then I realized it was the same 24 gangs I saw fighting over who was going to run Harvard, except the ones in Harvard spoke better English. And years later, many years later, I met the former district attorney of Santa Barbara, who had also read Illuminatus. The damnedest people read my books. And he said to me, you know, every town in the country has at least as many conspiracies as there are in Illuminatus. No, I forget his name. He was a former DA of Santa Barbara. I met him at Esalen. And he said every town has at least 24 conspiracies fighting over who's going to run the town. Mm-hmm. And I think that's so probably very true. Every town I know anything about is like that. The art world is run that way. Everybody conspires to promote their own gang. The National Lampoon did a parody once of the New York Review of Books. It was called the New York Review of Us. And it was Norman Mailer reviewing Susan Sontag, and Susan Sontag reviewing Norman Mailer, and Gore Vidal reviewing Noam Chomsky, and Noam Chomsky reviewing Gore Vidal, and so on and so on. And California, West Coast writers, we've had to start our own conspiracy to promote one another because the New York gang doesn't want to let us in. They want to control the turf. And the marijuana world runs that way. Everybody is fighting
let's go.
going to take over the marijuana business. In Los Angeles, you've got about 8 different gangs fighting over who's going to run the crack business in South Central LA. No matter where you look, you always find people work through affinity groups, and affinity groups tend to hide things from one another. By and large, we tend to think, my gang is just an affinity group. The other gang over there is a goddamn dirty conspiracy.
First of all, you still write for critique and journal questioning consensus reality. And second, could you comment on Anthony Sutton has written about the Skull and Bones and has suggested among a number of other conspiracy writers, such as Gary Allen and so on, that there is a
Let's open up the window here.
conspiracy that can trace its roots back to the Illuminati. Earlier, some people suggested that there is a single monolithic
coming down.
that can be traced back to Atlantis.
Well, actually, I already did that in Illuminatus. I traced it all back to
To
Atlantis.
plug up my window. Be
I
right
could
back.
trace it back to Lemuria if I was so inclined. But I don't believe in any monolithic conspiracy theory because it violates the basic principles of primate psychology. There is nothing that domesticated primates like better than the double cross. Every conspiracy falls apart because the members of it are betraying one another. There's considerable evidence that's how P2 fell apart. Conspiracies, I think, have a natural lifespan, just like people. Corporations have a natural lifespan. There's no corporation in the world that existed at the time of the first Queen Elizabeth, except the Dutch East India Company. Most corporations die in 100 years or so. Conspiracies seldom last more than a few years. The one big overriding conspiracy is a construct of minds that are very good at twisting facts to fit their own preconceptions. Yeah.
One of the main functions of propaganda defined as the instilled, self-justifying ideology of the ruling elite. One of the main functions of propaganda is to convince the public of the inevitability of the ruling elite's power structure. Could you talk a little bit about an idea I've heard attributed to you called Operation Mindfuck? It sounds like a counter-propaganda technique similar to H.G. Wells' radio hoax.
Operation Mindfuck is a form of guerrilla ontology. It's a group effort involving many people, and it is an attempt to galvanize the minds of many readers and television viewers and moviegoers to suddenly see the world in a new way.
Operation Mindfuck.
And membership in Operation Mindfuck is not secret. It's just once you understand what Operation Mindfuck is, if you are a writer or a director or otherwise involved in the entertainment, literature, theater game, you just automatically become a member if you're sympathetic to it, and Operation Mindfuck rolls merrily along. And since it is no centralized conspiracy, nobody can ever stop it, because there's nobody giving the orders. It's the only purely anarchist movement in the arts today.
So true.
And it's very easy to recognize the members. You'll find 23s popping up in their works. You'll find references to the oncoming Yin Revolution, the Aquarian conspiracy, space travel, and there's an old Italian proverb: when four sit down to conspire, three of them are fools and the fourth is a government agent. And so I don't believe, and I believe with modern surveillance techniques, that's more true than ever. And any overt action against the power structure is doomed to failure because of the techniques of control that have been developed.
Sadly
but the
true.
anarchistic impulses of art cannot be governed. I think more and more of the culture shapers are becoming part of Operation Mindfuck, and the whole world is having its mind fucked. And I'm very happy that I can play a humble part in this noble endeavor. And I don't think George Bush ever ducked the central issue of a question more cleverly than that. And get the latest reality hackers and learn more about computer viruses. Next question.
Do you have anything to say about him?
Do I have anything to say about Phil Donahue? I wish I had a head of hair like his. Next question.
What's your name of the woman that writing about the Catholic Church?
What's that?
What's the name of the woman who's been the journalist who's been doing the writings about the Vatican?
Oh, about the Vatican Bank? Penny Lernoux, L-E-R-N-O-U-X. And she appears regularly in the National Catholic Reporter. Her principal book on this subject, she's written a book about the CIA in Central America, but her principal book on the Vatican Bank and its relation to the Chase Manhattan and more respectable institutions is In Banks We Trust, which is published by Doubleday. Next, yes?
Considering that we're in cosmic fire, earth, air, and or water gates, and that all realities are being synchronized, that more people are getting, really, that there is a bigger conspiracy, that, have you heard of the meetings called Planetary Whodunits, starring everybody, free of by donation? And how would you belatedly answer the question, the greatest debate, are we civilized, comma, who wants to be earthlings, ... and why already? And also, how do you feel this relates to the second becoming of consciousness through, say, the Christ principle and Jesus Christ? What's happening on the planet now, do you see any relations in that regard?
Well, because one of its legs is both the same. The next question. Yes?
Would you comment on Olaf Palme's assassination?
Well,
Do you
that
have
was a
anything to say on that?
comment.
Who?
Olaf Palme?
Yeah.
Swedish Prime Minister.
No. No, I'm not at liberty to speak about that tonight. The main reason I'm not at liberty to speak about it is because I don't know a fucking thing about it.
Do you know anything?
It's against my religion to talk about things I don't understand, know anything about.
The greatest debate, are we civilized, comma, who wants to be earthlings, ... and why already? And also, how do you feel this relates to the second becoming of consciousness through, say, the Christ principle and Jesus Christ? What's happening on the planet now, do you see any relations in that regard?
Well, because one of its legs is both the same. The next question. Yes?
Would you comment on Olaf Palme's assassination?
Well,
Do you have
that was a
anything to say on that?
Who?
Olaf Palme?
Yeah.
Swedish Prime Minister.
No. No, I'm not at liberty to speak about that tonight. The main reason I'm not at liberty to speak about it is because I don't know a fucking thing about it.
Do you know anything?
It's against my religion to talk about things I don't understand, know anything about.
Subliminal messages in neurolinguistic program about the mass media.
Subliminal messages in the mass media. They're less and less subliminal. They're getting more and more liminal all the time, it seems to me. The way to find out what's going on, the kind of programming that's going on, is a game I invented a long time ago called Bavarian Television. This is based on the old Bavarian fire drill. The Bavarian fire drill is when you come to a red light, you jump out of your car, run to the car behind you, bang on the hood and say, "Everybody out, Bavarian fire drill." And run to the car behind that and yell, "Everybody out, Bavarian fire drill." And after you got back to about the 10th car, you flip around and run back to the front again. And most of them are following you at this point. You get into your car, the light changes, and you drive off. Like having taught them a lesson in obedience and idiocy and how easily people are manipulated, I decided Bavarian Television would be even more fun than a Bavarian fire drill. And Bavarian Television is you turn the set on and you keep changing the dial continually. And you don't get white noise. You get bits of dialogue and flashes of image, and you begin to see what the main message is and what the main ideas are that they are pushing. And it's enough to make you hide under the bed for a couple of weeks, but when you come out, you decide that you're not going to turn that damn machine on except very carefully and selectively in the future, because the main messages that come across are that everything ultimately is solved by somebody shooting somebody else, and that you need drugs. You need more and more drugs. You need drugs to do your income tax. If you're a woman, you need drugs to do the housewife. You need drugs to deal with the children. You need drugs to deal with your boss. But you got to use the drugs they're selling on that channel. If you use any other drugs, your brain will turn into a fried egg.
Baker and Merrill Lynch, E.F. Hutton, Don Regan connection to Mehmet Ali Agca. I heard that payments were made through Merrill Lynch. Do you know anything about that? Mehmet Ali Agca?
No. Mehmet Ali Aja is a very interesting case because he originally announced that he acted on his own initiative all by himself, and after a year in prison he announced that he was hired by the Bulgarian secret police. And they had a second trial, and at the second trial he acted like a lunatic. And there are several possible interpretations. One is that he was paid off to blow the case and started acting like a lunatic. The other is that he was crazy all along and it just became more obvious. The Italian court threw out the case against the Bulgarians on the grounds of insufficient evidence. It was not exactly a not guilty verdict in the American sense. It's closer to not proven in the Scotch sense, which means we suspect a lot but not enough to lock anybody up yet. Reading the testimony, I saw that one thing is very clear. Mehmet Ali Aja knew a great deal about the Bulgarian embassy, who worked there, their private lives, what their wives were called, what kind of paintings they had in their houses. And there are only two possible explanations of that. One is that he was working for them very intimately, and the other explanation is the CIA gave him all the information because they hired him to frame the Bulgarians. And I don't know which of those interpretations is more likely. So we'll just have to await further developments in that case, and we may wait a long time.
You mentioned earlier that the American Catholic Church is tending away from the Vatican. How do you see that manifesting? What import might that such a thing have, and how is that relevant to the priest in Oakland, Matt Fox, who was silenced by the Vatican recently for weird goings-on?
Well, there are more and more people being hauled back to the Vatican, to the Holy Office, for the doctrine of the faith and disciplined in various ways. There is a big unhappiness and restlessness among Catholics, not only in this country, but in Latin America. Archbishop Romeros was shot by some of the people who worked for the CIA, and then the Pope went right to that area and gave a speech saying priests should stay out of politics. In the mafia, that's known as letting them know where it came from. And American Catholics are more and more doing things like sheltering refugees from Haiti and announcing publicly, priests and bishops announcing publicly, we don't disapprove of birth control, we don't think it's against the Bible. And so we are headed for some sort of major collision. Lefebvre has finally been thrown out after going around for 30 years saying the Vatican has been taken over by Satanists and Freemasons. What? Archbishop Lefebvre in France. There was a big mystery. How was he getting away with it? Well, the mystery is over. He's not getting away with it anymore. They officially excommunicated him. That took a large hunk out of the church in France and in parts of America and other parts of Europe. But I think there's a much bigger breach coming than that one.
You made the point in the book, Media Rising, that about something about how you think of how much the issue you are conservative on could be irrelevant in the future, and how the issue, how a radical position could be conservative. Could you apply that to what you've been talking about vis-a-vis the Catholic Church?
Yeah. I think this has been a very conservative evening. This has been a very conservative talk. I have to do something different occasionally just to keep myself from getting bored. And so I decided to rake up some dirt about some of the conspiracies that are going on. I think they're all fundamentally irrelevant because the world is changing so rapidly that none of the clandestine power groups really know what's going on. My basic philosophy about the state of the world is contained in Lenin's alleged last words. I don't know if they're his actual last words, but it's been widely printed as his last words. The machine is running the engineers. I think modern science and technology are changing the parameters of human life so rapidly that everything the conspirators are fighting over is basically irrelevant. We will all be going into space much sooner than we expect. The boldest, the brightest, the bravest, the sexiest, and the funniest are all going to be living in outer space within the next 20 years. Longevity is coming along, which will make the Vatican's position on birth control even more ridiculous. There are new brain machines that very definitely increase mental activity and probably raise IQ. These machines are leading to further research. New machines will be along in the next 5 years that can change your brain any way you want it changed. We're no longer trapped in... Historically, humanity has been trapped in the cage of the behaviorist paradigm. What the behaviorists say about us has all too often been unfortunately true. We are very much like the rats in their laboratories. We react to conditioned stimuli in mechanically conditioned ways. Changing this has been a very long, arduous, and difficult process, especially since most people don't even know they need to be changed or don't even want to be changed. With modern neuroscience advancing the way it is, everybody can reprogram their brain as easily as we reprogram our computers, and more people are learning how to do this. We're all becoming self-programmers or meta-programmers, and that's changing everything that's been true in previous history, just like the Wright brothers changed everything. Once we could fly, everything changed. And now that we're learning how to fly our own brains, everything is changing again.
What's your prognosis on the Israeli-Palestinian question?
When human intelligence has increased dramatically, that will be resolved. As long as people stay as stupid as most of them are now, that will go on indefinitely, just like the Catholic-Protestant war in Northern Ireland will go on indefinitely under the present parameters of primate psychology. But I think we are developing into a post-primate level of consciousness. You won't notice it if you keep your eye on politics. But if you look at what's happening in neuroscience, you'll see the breakthrough is occurring, and it'll soon be possible to tell your friends from the apes. Two things. The publisher went bankrupt, so I had to find another publisher. And the second thing was I shortened the title to just Nature's God. It'll be published by Lynx Books in New York in about 3 months. Meanwhile, Lynx has reprinted The Earth Will Shake, and they'll be bringing out The Widow's Son in a week or so from now. Or maybe it's already starting to hit the bookstores. Next question. Yes?
Can you comment on the potential link between, well, basically, back up a little bit. You seem to be drawing a number of different threads and discussions of conspiratorial relationships between different groups currently, but concluding that it might be some sort of primate behavior, without real relevance in the long run. What types of influences or trends from biotechnology or computer science or, shall we say, other exterior forces, possibly UFO phenomenology, strictly scientifically analyzed, you see as leading to the next step?
Well, I already mentioned space colonization. Once we get out of the closed system of the Earth's ecosphere and start creating new ecospheres outside the Earth, all the rules of the game change. The Earth has, according to Peter Russell's book, The Awakening Earth, the Earth has 18 of the 19 characteristics of a living being in general systems theory. The one characteristic of a living being that Earth hasn't shown yet is reproduction. And obviously the Earth doesn't have a sexual partner, so you don't expect the Earth to reproduce like animals do. But if you consider what's going on in the planning stage about space colonies, Earth is about to reproduce the way a flower does by casting off spores. And there'll be little mini-Earths all over, probably in the Lagrange points around the moon at first, and then out in the asteroid belts, and then outside the solar system entirely. And Earth will then have reproduced, and the human race will start dividing up between the neophobes who will stay at home, the people who are afraid of change, and the neophiles who will pioneer new areas of space. As Tim Leary likes to say, the lesbian vegetarians will have their own world as soon as they want it. The Presbyterian nudists will have their world. The Priory of Sion will have its own world with the descendants of Dagobert II. Every nut group can have its own world, and every affinity group can have its own ecosystem and its own society. The major problem on Earth is that there are only two ways to resolve things when people are forced to deal with each other when they're getting in each other's way. One way is by contract, and the other is by force. And most people don't know how to draw up a good contract, and most lawyers won't tell them. And so most things ultimately on this planet are resolved by force. When we have more space and can move around each other, most of the sources of conflict will begin to disappear. And intelligence increase is the most interesting aspect of neuroscience. There's very important work on that being done, and very important work has been done already. The American public, for instance, has never voted for a politician who seems more intelligent than the average. That's how to predict elections. All my life, my adult life, I've been right about it. I've always predicted who was going to be elected president, and I never knew how I did it. I never could quite reconstruct the process that my brain went through in getting this conclusion: Bush is going to win. I wrote Bush is going to win to a friend in Oakland when Dukakis was 17 points ahead, for instance. And gradually it's dawned on me in the last couple of months how I do it. There were points I thought it must be some kind of ESP. Oh, wow, I've got ESP. But I gradually realized it's the one who wins is the one who gives the impression, whether it's real or not, who gives the impression of having the intelligence of the average voter. Those whose speeches are information rich, who suggest that they have more intelligence than the average, always lose. That's why Ronald Reagan got the biggest landslide victory in American political history. You couldn't find anybody in the country who felt intellectually inferior to Ronald Reagan. You could go to a home for the feeble-minded and ask them, and they'd say, oh yeah, we like Ronnie, he's a regular fella just like us. But that's changing. We're learning more and more about intelligence increase, and the rule of stupidity, which has played such a tremendous role in evolution up until now, is going to be replaced by the rule of intelligence very soon. Next question.
What's going to keep them from colonizing space with the same kind of imperialistic ethos and rabid roboticism and insincerity that's going on here on the planet? Blake says if you see things the way they are, that is infinite. To see things the way they are would be to see things as infinite. Isn't there a place on this planet for those who love change? Those who love change, can't they also love the planet and find eternity here on the planet? Realize, I know I must sound silly.
Right. Can you repeat that question more slowly? I didn't quite follow it.
Yes. What if neophiles?
I'm a little slow sometimes.
What if neophiles, potential neophiles or lovers of wisdom, who happen to love the earth and find that there can be infinite discoveries here on the planet, on the earth, in the wilderness, and perhaps return to the wilderness with an awakened consciousness unlike we've never, we can experience wilderness unlike we never could before.
I think that's going to happen. Matter of fact, it's already started to happen, just like space colonization. The important thing is the change in consciousness. That's the most important part of what's happening. But space colonization is the second most important part. And computers are the third most important part. But to try to get a picture of the future, you always, I think, have to think of at least 6 trajectories. My newsletter is called Trajectories, plural, because anytime you think about the future and project one thing forward, you get an absolutely crazy and warped picture, because the world is not made up of one thing that's changing and everything else standing still. The world is made up of numerous vectors, all of which are changing. like the fella in the 1890s who predicted that with the increase of he was only projecting population increase and assuming transportation wouldn't change. Now, instead of being covered with horse shit, the country is covered with pollution from the automobile fumes. We got a different problem, but not the problem.
Population issue increasingly irrelevant as new mini Earths are going to open up new places where population can be relocated, so that debate over how we are going to limit families is going to be increasingly irrelevant. I mean, these neo-Malthusians who are always the end of the world. Paul Ehrlich predicted the end of the world by 19. They're like by 1980, that we die in our world hasn't happened yet.
Well, actually, space travel makes a big difference. But even without space travel, Bucky Fuller has pointed out that as we move from an agricultural to an industrial economy, or from an industrial to a post-industrial computer economy, the average size of the family decreases without anybody doing it, without anybody passing laws or doing magic cross like Planned Parenthood. Women apparently just decide on their own they're not going to have huge families. I suppose the husbands have some say in it, but it's basically the women who are deciding. Coming from an agricultural to an industrial and post-industrial world, women see more options for themselves than just bringing a new child into the world every year. And if you look at the United States in the 18th century, the average woman had about 10, 12, 15 children, or as many as she could have until she dropped dead of stress. And this happens in every industrial country. It's happening throughout. Could I finish what I'm saying, please? I don't mean to talk while you're interrupting, but I'm the one they're paying, and I think they want to hear me. You find this throughout the industrial world, and it's starting to show up in Asia. Even in Asia, the population is starting to level off instead of steadily increasing like the Malthusian said it would. Now it's your turn.
The point I was also making is that a lot of these end-of-the-world prophets work from the total assumption that the Earth is a closed system, so-called spaceship Earth, ignoring the fact that it is possible for Earth to be part of an open system of space travel, so we don't have to worry about exhausting resources because we can get resources from at least other planets in the solar system. We don't have to worry about exhausting the food supply because we can terraform planets to create new food and so on. Yet time and time again, this is totally ignored in the debates in the media over world problems. Is that possibility? Why is that?
Well, I've been involved in the media myself. I've been involved in the magazine business and in the newspaper business. And I have never been able to decide whether there is somebody way up on top who passes orders down, or whether there is just a tremendous collection of idiots in those businesses. I still have an open mind about whether there are invisible string pullers or there's just plain stupidity. But some issues just never get raised in the mass media. As for instance, to get away from sociology to the merely trivial, Dan Quayle buying marijuana. That got out through the underground, what's the word I'm looking for? Through the less well-known radio stations. It popped up on 2 radio stations in LA, and then I found out it popped up on WBAI in New York, and the word has gradually got out, but not through the mass media. There are some things that just never get into the mass media, and it's very hard to find out why not. What?
What's the rumor?
It's not a rumor. There's a guy in jail in, I forget, in New York or New Jersey, who claims he sold marijuana to Dan Quayle, and his sister says that she was there when he sold it. So there's two witnesses to the charge. Yes?
Both your earlier segment and this one, you haven't mentioned the Japanese at all. And I was wondering, for example, 8 of the 10 largest banks in the world are now controlled by the Japanese. And I was wondering if they fit into this the conspiratorial worldview, or how you see them in terms of the future.
Yeah, well, one of my basic rules is the most successful conspiracy on Monday is on its way out by Friday. Because when a conspiracy becomes successful enough, everybody is afraid to tell the truth to it anymore. Everybody tells it the lies they think it wants to hear. That's what power means. Power means that nobody tells you the truth anymore. And that's my law of generally the burden of omnipotence. Means an eventual burden of nescience, because you don't get accurate feedback anymore. And so every conspiracy is on its way. It's a part of an evolutionary process of being replaced by another conspiracy.
So true.
Tim Leary lately has been saying the Cold War is ended because the American ruling class suddenly woke up, and while they've been brooding in paranoid dread over Russia for 30 years, the Japanese have bought everything on the planet. And then they discovered it's not just the Japanese. Everything they don't own, the Swiss have gotten their hands on. Next question.
Speaking of the media, are there any video or movie media projects with a Robert Anton Wilson script that we can look forward to?
I'm engaged in developing a movie for Pacific Entertainment and a TV series too. And Hollywood is the perfect illustration of von Neumann's logic, of quantum logic, that things have 3 possible states: yes, no, and maybe. In Hollywood, most things are in the maybe state for a long, long time. All I know is I'm getting paid enough that it's worthwhile for me, and whether the thing will go all the way through to production and release is one of those things that remains to be seen. Meanwhile, I'm getting more interest, and I'll have other movie and television deals coming along anyway. I think I'm going to be very active in those fields in the next 10 years. And it looks like a lot of fun.
See, I really like to be persuaded that the intelligence that seems to be at our disposal in terms of our ability, this whole increase of communication and what you've talked about over the years about how this multiplicity of information, and particularly including how we can increase our brain functioning. This whole night has been about building a case for the fact that there exists a power elite that seems to be hell-bent on preventing that kind of intelligence and the technology that would birth the greater intelligence from really reaching us. Other than you're pointing to the fact that the arts, and of course most of the arts come through television and the movies, and other than what you were just pointing out, the fact that Hollywood may even turn and put the spotlight on you, I am discouraged by the idea that there is so much vested against the technology that in fact probably even exists at this moment, but is kept out of our hands, can really reach us in time for us to have the options of leading the planet if we don't like how polluted the garden is anymore. I really think that it's important for people to realize that they have to take care of this planet now with the technology that we do have in our hands, and really focus on getting technology into our hands that at least give us the base to leave this planet in sound condition, if that still is a desirable option. So I would like to be persuaded. I would like to be, I would think Mindfuck is wonderful. And I'm concerned, and I would wish you would address the extent to which Mindfuck can really change. We can do the 100-monkey thing with Mindfuck simply by embodying the new frame of mind that transcends the primate, the way of behaving that just is in this turf battling stuff. I would like to see what it is that you're talking about, that you see where the glitch is, that the power that's vested against people really opening up and having a joyous, wonderful celebration of all the changes and options around them from occurring. So how can we beat
them? I mean, it's not, I know it's not an overt thing, or it's a attacking sort of thing. How are we going to get through the eye of the needle?
That's what I was speaking to.
Yeah, I know you were, and it got pushed aside.
Well, when you define the power elite as somebody else, I regard that as a loser script. I define the power elite as myself and my friends, and that's a winner script. And the way to accomplish things is with a winner script. Like a friend of mine in Silicon Gulch was telling me about a guy starting a new computer business there, and he said he's very optimistic. And I said, of course he is. Pessimists don't start businesses. Pessimists don't do a damn thing. Pessimists sit around telling each other how hopeless everything is. It's the optimists who get things done. And so I define myself as a winner. I define my programs as winnable. And I count on the stupidity of whoever seems to be in power to undo them eventually. Because, as I said, every conspiracy has a natural lifespan. Every conspiracy collapsed by double crosses from within or by superior cleverness by rival conspiracies. And stupidity has a definite evolutionary function. I am all for abolishing stupidity, but before it goes, while there's still a lot of it around, we should pay tribute to it. It has been the strongest force in human history to date. It has shaped more historical events, battles, wars, politics, more than any other single factor. And it's an evolutionary driver. For instance, the stupidest thing that I can remember in recent scientific history was the banning of LSD research in the 1960s. And that was the most promising agent of behavior change discovered in the whole history of psychology. And the government made it illegal for psychologists to pursue that line of research. We suddenly were back in the days of the Holy Inquisition. And when you ask yourself, what is the function of that kind of stupidity in evolution? Well, what stupidity does is it forces the intelligent to get more intelligent. John Lilly, when they wouldn't let him do acid research anymore, invented the isolation tank.
Another special one, here with Marcus Ryle, Rob Rosen, my best friend Rob Rosen. Rob introduced me to Marcus. Marcus has this incredible history.
Detector test.
Yeah, now that last part was very important. You know, you gotta have a winner script for yourself. Don't logic yourself into a loser script. Because indeed you could choose the kind of world you could live in. But yeah, I'm gonna wrap it up here. It's been a good drawing stream. Thanks for chilling, Kimoche and Perry. I'll see you guys later.